Welcome to tonight's episode of Pivotal Change. I am your host, Ryan Conn from CS Business Consulting, and Pivotal Change is a show about exactly that, finding the tips, the tricks, the techniques, anything that can help you develop your leadership, your influence, and get you to make that one or two things needed for the pivotal change to where you find success. Now, if you've been watching the show before, you may notice that I'm someplace different. I have a different background. I'm currently traveling through North Carolina, and the rest of the show will be filmed on location when I arrive. But I wanted to get this kicked off so that I can bring on the guest and talk about several things that have recently happened in this country. We're going to be talking about insurance. We're going to talk about catastrophe and crisis and preparing and a lot of the leadership principles that go along with those things, all the way down to some of the technical details of how to make sure you don't lose coverage and put yourself in a bad spot. But in order to do that, I want to bring up a topic from my 5 positions of leadership, and I want to talk specifically about leading out front. Now, leading out front is different than, of course, leading from on top or from behind or alongside or on bottom. And leading out front is something that needs to be utilized in various situations and in various ways. So I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes or so talking about some of those ways that you should be as a leader looking to lead out front, when, how, and where. So one of the things that you want to do is you want to make sure that in times of crisis, you, the leader, are visible. That means not just shining in the spotlight on television or on Instagram or something like that, but you're leading visibly amongst the troops, amongst your subordinates and other leaders in the rank and file. In order to do that and be visible, you have to be present. So you can't just be absent and try to make decisions from on high or from afar. You need to be present. And again, we understand that in the modern world, some people work literally a world apart on the other side of the globe, but the regular meetings, the regular FaceTimes and Zooms or whatever it may be, you need to be as present as possible. So the crisis that we've been seeing as I'm driving through North Carolina, the disasters from Helene, and then we have the Hurricane Milton that just hit in Florida, and this is a catastrophic time for many people. So in order to remain out front during this turmoil, you want to be able to present yourself in a calming way. You want to have your influence be of steadfastness. You want people to look at you and say, hey, he's calm, she's breathing, she's in control, he's not freaking out, emotions are dialed in, and that way you can help guide the way forward and capture people's attention who may be stuck in panic. Now, not every single crisis is a hurricane. Sometimes it's a financial crisis. Perhaps you have maybe the death of somebody that's associated with your ranks, family members, a staff member, something like that. Sometimes the crisis is emotional. There might be something terrifying or scary that happened, and you need to step out and make sure that you're visible and ready to take those challenges head on. After all, as the leader, the buck stops with you, and you're the one that's supposed to be providing the path forward through driving the vision, getting people rallied around the vision. So I want to provide an example from history. And hopefully everyone's fairly familiar with Winston Churchill and what he did during World War II. Not only his speeches and his bravado in making sure that he made his claims and followed up with his claims, but during that he was highly visible. He made sure that he was making public appearances very often, and he was reinforcing confidence among the citizens, among the troops, and among the global people of influence. This kind of leadership fosters trust and it fosters courage within your teams and those you influence. Another thing that's very important is that a leader will have to lead out front in times of criticism. When there is some type of attack, criticism, slandering, blasting, major complaints, the leader needs to step forward and they need to come out and be able to make these decisions underneath the criticism. They need to be able to not let them truly get to them and get under their skin, so to speak, but you need to be able to say that, hey, we're all stakeholders here and I'm going to lead out front. I'm going to own my mistakes if we've made them, and that's where the criticism is coming from, or as a company, we've made mistakes or errors. We're going to own them. We're going to take actions to correct them and make people whole. We're going to go ahead and take responsibility. And we're going to, instead of shifting blame, we're going to own it, move forward, and make ourselves better and make the people that were affected negatively as whole as possible. A great example of taking responsibility under criticism is Mary Barra. She's the CEO of General Motors. And in her time, they had a major ignition failure. This is back in like 2014. And the ignition failure ultimately led to several accidents and even loss of life, some fatalities. So General Motors is in the hot seat. And what did she do as the CEO? Well, she immediately took ownership of the situation. She went public and acknowledged the problem, acknowledged that they were going to do an internal investigation. They were going to oversee the millions of vehicles that were going to be affected by this. She testified before Congress. She demonstrated transparency and accountability by getting in the face of criticism and leading out front. What she did is she helped ensure things with the customers, the investors, the families that were affected, all of the regulators, and she reinforced that the company was going to be strong and committed to the safety and to the quality of their product. This was a huge savior moment for General Motors, where they could have really gone under serious scrutiny and serious financial times. And again, people's lives were lost, and she responded the right way. Not only did it help General Motors, it boosted her reputation, her followers, the investors, and everyone involved overall. The other time that a leader needs to lead out front is in a time of catastrophe, and specifically with decisiveness. So you need to be decisive in the face of chaos and catastrophe. So this kind of really brings us into the whole Milton and the whole Helene thing, is that in catastrophic situations, people are looking to the leader who's going to have to step forward out front and make swift, decisive actions. Now, here's the thing that we know is in the moments as information is unfolding and the chaos is probably at its peak, you're going to have a lack of information. So you have to make the best decision you can with the information that is available at the time. If you can articulate that you are making the best decision for the most amount of people with the relative information you have at the time, almost everyone will back those decisions and they will trust you. Now, remaining calm is an essential part of this. And there are multiple ways to remain calm by mentally preparing, bracing for the worst case scenario, having a high set of skills, breathing techniques, being physically, mentally in shape. Those are things that you can do. And ultimately, you make those difficult choices under pressure, and people will lead and follow lead themselves in the way that you led, and then follow with the decision that you've made. And you will be able to navigate that storm much more effectively if you can stay calm and make decisions. So one of the key takeaways is that during a catastrophe, clarity is needed. Clarity of thought, clarity of action, the ability to give the specific orders so that people who might be experiencing stress and crisis and audio exclusion and increased blood pressure and heart rate and tunnel vision and all kinds of things, they want to either hesitate or run or freeze. You're going to provide the direction necessary, and your leadership is going to be strong by stepping out front, and it gives them confidence. And this is a high stakes environment. So when you execute, it's going to prevent a lot of catastrophe just from lack of action. Now, other things that you have to do is you have to demonstrate emotional intelligence. So in all of the categories already discussed, emotional intelligence is very important. And emotional intelligence really means that leaders have to be attuned with the emotions of themselves and the emotions of their teammates, and then how those emotions play off of each other. You need to be able to show empathy and sympathy and support, while at the same time you have to stay strong and composed. You may be experiencing stress and loss personally in some of these situations that we've brought up, but your composure is what's going to be very contagious. You want to have contagious good behavior, not contagious bad behavior like panic, anxiety, negative thought. You want to be as optimistic as appropriate, and you want to lead forward with emotional intelligence and recognize the stresses on your people's faces, the stresses in your people's actions and their voices, and stay composed. Balance is an essential component of this. You have to push people forward, especially in crisis, in difficult times, but you have to keep morale up as much as possible during a crisis. There's another good example of this. New Zealand had a prime minister that there was a big terrorist event at the Christchurch terrorist event. There was an attack. It really did a lot of harm. There was a lot of emotional intelligence displayed by the leader. He had made his addresses understanding that there was grief, understanding that there was fear. The entire nation was needing to remain calm and composed. There's times where if you are not a decisive leader, you could go on the so-called witch hunt as a nation. And so New Zealand survived this terrorist event because of the articulation, the sympathy, the intelligence, and the perceptiveness that the prime minister put in place through the public addresses and the sympathies personally given to the people. And then I want to hit this last topic, is that inspiring and mobilizing a team. And this goes back to the primary things you probably heard me mention in stepping out front, is that when you draw people together to say, hey, here's the vision of ourselves in the future. Here's where we want to go. This is what we want to be when we grow up. You are a bit of that cheerleader and the rallying person. You step out front and you say, here's the action plan, and I'm going to take the first step for us. So follow me. I'm going to blaze the trail, get the machete out, start hacking through the vines of the jungle so we can all have a clear path forward. That's a great time to step out front as a leader. The team is now going to be seeing that they are led towards solutions. They're then going to seek their own solutions and their own ways to be productive and more efficient. They're going to apply the techniques and skills that they've acquired on their own or been learned and taught through the training systems and the mentorship that you provide. And they're all going to push together, motivated and rising together. That's the best part, is they're going to get through whatever circumstances prevent themselves, because they're going to be inspired and empowered and now contributing to go ahead and adapt to the situation as it unfolds so that we can all get to the vision, get to that goal together. So here's a very famous example. Elon Musk. You should all pretty much know who that is. He's repeatedly had to mobilize teams during near catastrophic situations, huge financial turmoil and failures. Tesla's almost gone bankrupt with some financial struggles multiple times. His other businesses have had to stay proactive and push out product because investors and the market was demanding things. He's pushed the boundaries all over the place, and he's maintained inspirational presence that rallied his people to keep pushing, work the longer hours, push harder, find a solution. And his employees and his investors and his customers all benefited because he was willing to be the inspirational visionary. So those are ways that we can all figure out how and when we need to lead out front. So I want you to pay attention when I get where I'm going and I bring on my next guest, Jared Morgan, how leading out front plays in all the situations that we're going to talk about on the remainder of the show. So sit tight, hang in right there, and we will be back with more pivotal change right after this commercial break. Welcome back from the break, everyone. We are ready for more pivotal change. And now I have that first guest that I promised, Jared Morgan. Jared is a very good friend of mine, and I've brought him on today to talk a lot about workflow systems, about preparation, and what to do in scenarios where maybe something goes wrong or even the worst case scenario happens. Jared Morgan is the owner of the Paducah Insurance Agency, and he is also an expert in helping people work with technology and workflow and create efficiencies in their firms. So, Jared, thank you for coming back on the show again.
It's my pleasure. Happy to be here and happy to have the opportunity to talk about this stuff.
Well, I want to jump in and make this conversation a little bit related to these two recent hurricanes, Helene and Milton, that have come through over the last couple weeks. And I want to talk to you and just kind of open the floor to you to discuss about workflow and systems and redundancies. And from your perspective, both in insurance for the worst case scenario and as an expert in planning those things and implementing them, what do leaders and business owners and even individuals need to know and do?
Yeah, it's great. First off, I would definitely say when you're talking about insurance as a funding source for disasters, it's not perfect. It's not going to take care of every piece, and it's really only out there as a pool of money to kick into play. For those that find themselves in the worst case scenario, you're going to recover a lot better if you've made some arrangements on the front end for business redundancy, especially in workflow. So database businesses, which is where I tend to be in more because of the nature of our business, that goes down to how have you set up your data, where your systems are, what that looks like. For a small business that's dealing in data and sales and services, you're talking, do you have cloud-based servers in place? Are you in a position to where you can work from home because you've put the infrastructure in place with a VoIP phone system and basically where if you've designed things properly, then you can work anywhere in the world. And then a natural disaster hit like a hurricane or a tornado or a wildfire that takes out your building or access to your building doesn't necessarily impact your income. So that's a big one. We can go further from there when you're talking about the area-wide disasters. If you're selling products from a retail store, then it becomes a lot more difficult discussion to try to continue working if that location is impacted.
Gotcha. So a lot of what I'm hearing you say is that try not to, as much as you can, make the full tangible brick and mortar portion of your business the sole reliance on your operations. And we know that maybe at a factory or, like you said, a retail store, that probably will be most, if not all, of what you do. But as much as you can build redundancies and remote services, you mentioned things like VoIP phone systems and cloud-based servers, you want to have those in place. And I can imagine even a factory just having the ability, if you get flooded out of your factory, to take phone calls and advise your customers and advise your attorneys and your family members and your employees where and what to do and where to go. That's a lot better than just a complete loss and complete blackout.
Yeah, so you nailed it. You nailed the next piece for me is number one, have a thoughtful strategy for continuing your services and be able to work remote. Second is communicating. You're talking about, at least whether it's your employees or your family, having talked about things in advance about if a disaster happens, how do you communicate with them, or do you have a place to meet? Do you have just some general things in place that say, hey, once the power comes back on, once electricity's back, once phone systems are back, once internet's back, here's where we start going, and here's how we start communicating, and a lot of that's going to be likely in today's world by text. And through cell phone service. And so then it's, do you need to shift that over to something like Telegram that's not, or Facebook Messenger, or a platform that's not reliant solely on the cell networks, but they could be relying on, just internet access. And that's a factor as well. So that's layer one from where we sit. If we're talking about disaster recovery, yeah, there is a huge difference between a disaster that's specific to your physical location. Your office building burns, it collapses, it gets hit by a car, whatever it could be that would be specific to you, even a tornado, and then an area-wide disaster like a hurricane. We've had two really good examples of how horrible an area-wide disaster can be. And so when you get to that level, in both of those scenarios, if you're unable to continue work, then that's where something like a well-designed insurance plan can come into play, to try to at least fill some of the gaps of the lost revenue that you would have, not to mention the cost to repair the building and the cost of lost goods and that situation, or any employee injuries, in fact, if they're working when the disaster happens.
Gotcha. So jumping back to a little bit earlier part of that response, I'm going to summarize maybe a little bit of what you said, kind of with a guy who I think is a genius in his own right. Other people may not think so, but Mike Tyson has a famous quote where he says, everyone has a plan until they get hit in the mouth. And that makes me think about everyone has an operational plan when everything is sunshine and rainbows. But when you have a disaster, you get hit in the mouth, do you have a plan? So you're saying for us to basically plan on getting hit in the mouth at some point and be able to recover and overcome those obstacles, whether it's specific to you or area wide. And then again, your communication is going to be a huge point of that.
Yeah, so that you've nailed it. I mean, I'm in the business of, if the worst case scenario happens, how do we at least try to make you whole? And I would say over and over again, insurance, when the disaster happens, you're not calling your insurance agent. You're calling the fire department, you're calling the police, you're calling somebody else, emergency services, ambulance. There are things that are higher priority than the financial damage that you're going to get impacted by initially. So right out of the gate, that call is to someone. We're really probably your third or fourth level of phone call once that gets into place. Now, then it's a discussion of how do we get back. And unfortunately, if it involves construction, it's going to take a while, right? So I mean, that's the reality of the world we live in, sadly. But let's talk about area-wide. Some of the examples that we've had in the last couple of weeks of these hurricanes, last month. It's been really bad, and it's been really bad because, especially in the case of Helene, it wasn't where you expected the damage to happen. When they're talking about that one coming up and barreling through, they're talking about, hey, we may have hurricane force winds in Atlanta, Georgia, or Valdosta, those areas, and that's a lot of damage. That's terrible. They don't build, their building code's not reflected to withstand that. It's not something they normally see, but that's not where all the mess happened. The mess happened when you had North Carolina that had an unnamed storm came inland and dumped 12 inches of rain shortly before Helene hit, and dumped another 19 inches of rain. And that there were places on the side of hills that if someone had asked them before this happened, hey, do you need flood insurance or coverage for a flood? They'd say, oh, I don't need it. And if I need flood insurance, we're going to see the ark floating by. I hear that occasionally from people when we talk about it. But the reality is, in a certain high volume rain environment, everybody needs flood insurance. And sadly, flood insurance in the 70s was taken under the wing of FEMA. And FEMA is the primary financial provider of flood insurance to the U.S. And that program is billions of dollars in debt because it's never charged actuarially sound rates. And also because it's out there and there's laws that require if a bank loans money on a house that they've got to, got to have flood insurance on it for the value of the loan. Because of that, a lot of people don't buy flood insurance. So, well, I'm not in a flood zone. I'm not going to worry about it. But there are towns that were not in flood zones that are no longer there after this event from Helene. And so, it's one of those things where both the business process automation and thinking about how your employees work, and if they're computer driven, can they work remotely, and the discussion around whether or not you need flood insurance are things that it doesn't really make you feel any better after your home has been destroyed by a flood and there's no insurance coverage for it because you didn't purchase flood insurance, that nobody else on your street also didn't buy flood insurance because you're outside of a map. That doesn't help anything. And so I would definitely say there's a discussion to be had about, hey, let's think this through. And if it's possible now for a mountain town to flood, Nashville, Tennessee flooded in the shortly, I think it was 2012 or 2014, they had a flood in Nashville that hit Opry Mills and a lot of the areas around Opryland. And there were houses I know of people that said they were on the side of a hill and they got so much rain in such a short time period, their house flooded. And it's not just your low-lying areas that you got to worry about. So all that to say, a discussion about, hey, if I've got the money to do it and I have assets I want to protect, then why in the world am I not having a serious conversation with an insurance agent about the outside chance of having a flood coverage and needing flood coverage and really just adding that to your program? And fortunately, we are starting to see insurance companies add flood coverage to the homeowner's policy. Commercial property carriers are starting to add flood coverage to the commercial property coverage or the commercial property policy. It's not full limits, but it's a start. And I would encourage everybody to take a serious thought and look at it and at least find out what the costs would be, because in these types of scenarios, it's crazy.
So let me jump in right there, Jared. That's a good question. So as business owners, as leaders that are trying to prepare people for, getting hit in the mouth, as I kind of related to earlier, whose duty is it to present the opportunity for flood insurance in this example? We've only got maybe 45 seconds for an answer, but should we rely on our agents to bring that up to us? Or should we be aware to say, hey, do I need this also?
So I would tell you, I would love to say that most agents are sharp enough to be presenting it to you. Because of the nature of how it's been cordoned off and removed from normal insurance discussions because it's goes through FEMA, a lot of agents don't pay attention to it unless the bank requires it. So I would encourage any consumer to make a phone call to their agent and talk to them and say, hey, tell me about flood. I know people flooded in these mountain towns in Appalachia that didn't seem to be in a flood zone. What's the possibility that happened here, and what would it cost for me to get some flood coverage in place?
Okay, good deal. Well, that's a perfect spot for us to put a pin in real quick. We're going to jump over to a commercial break. So everyone sit tight. We're going to come back. We're going to talk more about the disasters and the insurance and ways that you can prepare and what responses that you can expect with some more industry data as well. So we'll be right back with more Jared and more Pivotal Change right after this commercial break. Welcome back from another commercial break. We still have my good friend Jared Morgan on here with us, and we've been talking insurance and a little bit of response and recovery. And we're going to keep moving this conversation along, but we stuck a pin in the conversation, and I want to move into talking more specific about the recent Helene and Milton hurricanes. And that has a lot of people asking me, as a leader of a business, I'm thinking, what's going to happen to my insurance policy and my rates? Am I going to be able to get coverage because of what happened to my area? And possibly tell the audience what might be happening to the market as well because of two back-to-back events like this.
Yeah, so it's really a challenging time for insurance right now. So we've seen just to start with, we've seen substantial property and construction cost inflation. the value of vehicles and used vehicles and vehicle parts have gone through the roof. And then lawsuits, really, I mean, I know everybody sees the lawyers' billboards all over the place that says, if you've been in a wreck, call us, we'll get you $1 billion. But what that has all done collectively is increase the value of claims. And sadly, insurance is shared risk. So you can be angry at an insurance company for wanting to make money, but they're no different than any other industry where they're seeking profit. And most of the companies, most of them, some of them don't do a good job of this, but most of them pay the claims fairly and do what they're supposed to do when the claim time comes. But the industry has gotten obliterated from a number of, not just have we had higher costs and claims because of autos and cost to rebuild and the lawsuits that are happening that are turning a $5,000 fender bender into a $50,000 settlement. Now we've seen in the 5 worst property weather loss years, of the 6 worst, 5 have been in the last 5 years, if that makes sense. So there has been a huge amount of catastrophic weather. Now, is that because more people have built in areas where there's catastrophic weather? Is that because there's a lot more value in buildings and structures out there? I don't know. But the reality is we're in a really challenging weather cycle. So all that has led to the industry as a whole losing their surplus, which is their savings they have set aside to pay claims in a worst case scenario. And as a result of that, we've seen substantially rising prices in insurance. So not only have you seen rising prices, but you also seen the insurance companies are looking around, whereas in the past they might have said, hey, you guys, you've had 3 claims in the last 3 years. We're willing to stick it out with you because we think it'll work itself out. Now they're like, we don't have a choice. We're canceling your insurance. And we're seeing those accounts that have had claims get canceled and have to go to what we call excess and surplus or non-standard care coverage. And those prices are sometimes 3 or 4 times more than what they were. And then the coverage is not as good. So you've had this massive influx of cancellations. So when you're talking about something like these 2 hurricanes that have hit, if you're not in the immediate area, that you're not personally affected, you think, hey man, I've dodged that bullet. Our insurance ought to be stable. But the real challenge is all of the insurance companies buy reinsurance, and so they might keep the first $1 million of a property loss, and then everything above that they get reimbursed from their reinsurers. And the reinsurers essentially are the market of last resort, or the final check writers when large losses happen. So Florida's been an absolute mess from a reinsurance standpoint, or from an insurance standpoint, because not only have you had catastrophic weather hammer them, they've also got a ton of fraud, and they've made some law changes recently that should make it better. But these 2 hurricanes in a back-to-back fashion are really going to soak up a lot of cat excess capacity from a liquidity standpoint. So that all being said, I was expecting prices to start to moderate, the price increases in insurance to start to moderate, but with these 2 hits, they may not. So we probably will see higher than inflation increases in insurance as a result of these, even in states that weren't directly impacted.
Wow. And, when you explain it like that, it really does make a lot of sense, because we probably think a lot more personally, like, I haven't been in car accidents. Why is my auto rate going up? But
Absolutely.
when you think on, I don't want to say it globally, but at least on the nationally scale of, we're getting hammered, absolutely hammered by natural disasters, and we live in a lawsuit happy society. And the price of the average vehicle has gone from 20 to 25,000 to 60 to 80,000 times however many million wrecks. You're talking about billions and billions of dollars. And I do appreciate it for you, because it's very easy to get angry at the insurance companies, but they have a right to earn a profit as well, as long as it's not some exorbitant excessive profit. Nobody likes that, but they need to run a profitable business. Otherwise, why are you doing it? And you need to protect your customers. Now, I think it's really important that you made the statement that even though you may be a little upset with your insurance rates increasing, most insurance companies do pay out fairly. The assessments pay a little slower than you want. Everybody wants their healing and their money now, but there's a due diligence process. You mentioned the fraud that goes into things. So everyone has to be protected holistically in the process. And unfortunately, that takes time and money. And so that makes me think about going into this next section here. Again, I just happen to be focusing on the recent events, the hurricanes. But in this area, how do these people go about, with lack of communications and the lack of ability, like we talked, to getting these steps? Like you said, they're going to contact multiple people, emergency services, utility companies, construction companies, and insurance companies, 3rd or 4th step down the way. What is the process that somebody's going to have to lead their family or lead their company through to start being made whole, like you had mentioned?
Yeah. So it's really unfortunate. We've seen and we've got examples of similar broad scale destruction after the tornado that hit Mayfield, Kentucky, close to us in December of 21. So the reality is, if you're going to sit and wait for the insurance company to come and rescue you, again, we're probably the third or fourth phone call that needs to happen. You're going to find yourself in a really challenging environment. Our customers that are catastrophically impacted, the ones that recover the best are the ones that take personal responsibility for cleanup and may even start construction, even though it may make the insurance company mad. They may start construction before the insurance company's even done determining how much they owe. If they've got the financial ability to do that, the importance is resuming operations as quickly as possible. So I know of a couple of pretty decent sized businesses that were in Mayfield whose facilities were destroyed, who immediately moved to a different town and started and forced their employees to move with them, and they'd have to drive 20 minutes to continue work, but they got back up and running. And some of them may not move back even after they get the settlement from the insurance company, but they resume the ability to work, to generate income. Now they could have sat and waited, and they had decent amount of lost income coverage on their insurance, but that at some point when that runs out, they're stuck. Well, and then too, if you wait, if you're not paying your employees in that time period, they may have to go find jobs somewhere else. So the I would tell you the importance is recognizing that nobody's going to come rescue you in this situation. Start doing the cleanup and the prep work to resume operations, even if that means moving to a different facility or a different community. And then too, touching base once you can, touching base with your employees to see where they are. Because for most businesses, I know mine's certainly in this boat. If I don't have my key employees, I'm having a hard time taking care of customers or generating revenue. And so there's an element of not just taking personal responsibility, but as a business owner, taking responsibility for those that depend on you for income. And insurance certainly plays a part in that. But insurance can't do it for you. We are simply a funding source. So listen, finding a contractor after an area-wide natural disaster, it's hard enough to find good contractors. They'll be there in 2 weeks is the normal comment that they tell you, right? But even finding one in this kind of situation where it's just widespread destruction and there's a million roofs that need to be rebuilt, finding a contractor is difficult. So you're going to have to work, and there's no insurance company that's out there. They're ready to cut you a check for the contractor, but they're not going to find the contractor for you normally. So you've got to realize, hey, this is on me as the owner of the property, as the business owner, to start doing the cleanup as much as we can do what we can to get back in order and get working, and then kind of figure, hey, insurance is a funding source. We'll deal with that funding source later. In the short term, we got work that needs to be done and to get after it.
Gotcha. I love it, Jared. I'm going to put a nice golden soapbox underneath it, which is very, very appropriate and needed at this time. I want to pull up a soapbox right next to you. We're going to stand on them together because I really want to drive this leadership message home to the audience. Okay. You made the statement that you have to go under the expectation that you are responsible for yourself and nobody's coming to save you. And we see time and again in the American history in the disasters that the people just waiting around for FEMA, for example, those are the people in the most destitute of circumstances. And I have taught my kids a lesson that I did not realize was going to be so significant. I was just trying to get them to cry and whine a little less at the time, but it became basically a core statement of our household. I can say to somebody, hey, if you fall down, everyone says, oh, get back up. Well, we came with a statement that says, if you fall down, get back up as fast as you can because it hurts less. And it became an entire statement instead of just a little cliche. And I think what you're saying here is you're saying that you need to take personal responsibility to get you and the people reliant on you back up as quickly as possible because it hurts less. And that shows care for the people that are in your stead. And so, we're gonna have one more segment right after this. I don't want to eat too much into that, but if you're going to take a single moment, shining moment in the sun, to just put your heart out here, what commanding statement would you say as a person that looks at disaster after disaster for a living to say this is the best thing you can do right now today to be ready to get back up as quickly as you can?
Yeah. So I don't know that this is the single statement I could make, because I could make several, but insurance is there as catastrophic. It's not there for every small thing that could pop up and cost you money. So you have to take responsibility for those things that you're capable of dealing with out of budget, and do appropriate deductibles and And we'll hit more on that in a minute. But man, personal responsibility over and over in whatever shape and form or fashion that takes, whether that is the business owner, the homeowner, the person that's been impacted by natural disasters. Nobody's coming to save you. And if they are, it's going to be a while.
Gotcha. So be ready to lift yourself up, lift everybody out, have a plan in place to where you can operate and save yourself. And then the funding and the things that help you recover will be the boost that they're intended to be to help you in that catastrophic situation. And don't sweat the small stuff. So once again, we're going to put another pin in it. We're going to finish this conversation in about what it is to not sweat the small stuff and what it is to deal with catastrophic specific instances. And we're going to wrap up this conversation in the show just after this next commercial break. So everyone sit tight for more Pivotal Change and more Jared Morgan. We are back on Pivotal Change for our final segment of the night, and we are continuing this conversation, especially considering the recent events in this country, with Paducah Insurance Agency owner Jared Morgan. And we've been talking a lot about catastrophe and responses and preparation. And one of the things that we just paused on the break was not sweating the small stuff. And so I want to turn over the conversation to Jared to tell us, what does it mean as, an insurance perspective for business owners and individuals to not be sweating the small stuff?
Yeah, so that's a great place to start when you're talking about where the industry is right now. So let me back up and say, from the perspective of the insurance company, they're looking at their customers. Their reinsurers are coming in and they're saying, "Holy cow, inflation is eroded the price of the dollar. So whereas we would have reimbursed you after $1 million in the past, we're going to bump that up to $2 million, because that's about the equivalent value once we account for the inflation that's hit in the last several years." So the insurance company's deductible is going higher. Well, then the insurance company underwriters who decide which risks to keep and which risks to write, they're looking around going, okay, anybody that's got claims we want to get off of. And if they've got more than 2 claims, there's criteria they use, but especially in property, multiple small claims are a huge red flag. In our business, we say frequency of losses leads to severity of losses, because for whatever reason, once people realize that they can turn claims in if they've got multiple small claims, actuarially they're almost guaranteed to end up turning in a much larger claim. So if I'm an underwriter and I'm looking at my list of customers and I see that there's an individual that's turned in several small claims, I'm non-renewing them. And when I non-renew them, what happens then is they end up going, as we talked about earlier, they end up going to the non-standard market, and they pay 3 or 4 times what they were paying before, with substantially lower limits and a lot higher deductibles. And so they're in a position at that point where they can't even turn in small stuff because their deductible is being forced to be so high. So all that being said, when you, as a consumer right now, more than any other time since the late 80s, it is extremely important to make sure you're paying your bill and not lapsing for non-pay. And if you've got small claims that come through, take care of them and don't turn them into insurance, and recognize that insurance is most important for those catastrophic total losses that are so big that you can't deal with those without borrowing money or substantially reducing your savings and spending a fortune. So right now, more than any, so I've got a great example for you. We've had a lot of wind, especially for Helene, even in Kentucky, we had a lot of wind come through paired with a lot of rain. And while we didn't have enough wind for the wind to directly damage buildings, we saw a lot of trees fall because of the combination of saturated ground and high winds pushed them over. So insurance in general doesn't really deal with trees well unless the tree is on a covered building. There's a little bit of coverage in a homeowner's policy, typically after the deductible is applied, to help clean up trees that have fallen in the yard. But by and large, unless the tree is on a building, and the insurance will pay to cut the tree off the building and clean it up, but otherwise it's outside of insurance. So we've had a lot of calls from people that are saying, "Hey, I've got an estimate from a tree removal service for $3 or $4 grand that to get all these trees that have blown over. Does my insurance cover that?" And that to me, that's a really good example of an area where, as an owner of property, you need to be prepared to deal with that out of budget. And that sounds like a big hit for a lot of consumers, and it is. But turning that in may imperil your ability to get good coverage, which could lead to a much larger loss, either in higher premiums or in a future large loss that you've got higher deductibles and less limits on because you're in the non-standard market.
Yeah, well, and what you're saying makes total sense. Having me, you know me, you're my insurance guy, so I've had to use my insurance a couple times in the recent history, and of course, my very good reasons, the catastrophic stuff that you're aware of. But I can also see that had I, tried to get my $1,000 payout on some trees, that the flood that happened would not have covered, right? And I could have shot myself in the foot. And I look at, playing what's smart. We have to understand that as an individual, it costs money to run a home. As a business owner or business leader, it costs money to run a business. And we have to budget for unexpected losses and unexpected, uh, probably a little bit more than an inconvenience, but these hurdles that we're going to have to get over. And if we run to the insurance agency, it'd be like me, I'm a fan of metaphors. It'd be like running to the ER every time you get a hangnail or a paper cut, when you really just need to put some antiseptic and a band-aid on it at home. Or if your kid falls on a skateboard and scrapes their knee, you run to the ER, and what happens is you're wearing out the health insurance, you're wearing out the whole system, and everybody's rates go up. But in this situation with property, like you said, you could literally be shooting yourself in the foot, and they say, hey, you've had 2 or 3 claims, and congratulations, you got $1,000 covered for some trees, a couple of shingles blew off, you got a few $100 for the shingles on your roof, and a little dent repair on your car. But guess what? Now you're done. And when something really bad happens, you're either out 4 times the amount annually, or you're uncovered because you
Yep.
sweat the small stuff like we told you not to. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. And something that most people don't think about. We insure a lot of churches, and so when churches are talking about budgets, I think the rule of thumb we typically use for commercial buildings is you need a 1% of the replacement value of the structure of the building that you need to be setting aside for maintenance on that building. You think about replacing a roof. Most families are not prepared to spend the $20,000 or $30,000 it's going to cost, or more now, because it's gotten a lot more expensive to put a roof on a home, and they may not have that savings sitting out there, but are for somebody that's got larger facilities, you need to be socking away some money to help maintain that facility for ongoing HVAC repair, electrical issues, plumbing issues, hot water heaters, and roof, and those things that may come up from the weather that we've experienced here lately. And Ryan, I'll finish with this. I don't want to go too long on this, but there's a lot of families that have been really negatively impacted by the increase in inflation and the limitation and the erosion of the dollar's purchasing power. And they might not even have that savings before all this has hit, but it's put everybody in a strain. And I'm going to tell you that we're going to start seeing that increase exponentially in the quality of homes and the maintenance on the houses that gets deferred because the money's not there to do it, because inflation's been so negatively impactful on people's budgets. So it's something that's concerning, to say the least. But if you're in a position where you're a business owner, you can put the money away. Don't miss that opportunity to save and set aside cash and capital to help maintain the facilities that you're in, because you're gonna need it at some point.
I got you. And so I'm going to paraphrase it. I think you're really getting us something that we can write down, take notes of, and start applying to our lives. So without going too much into the financial realm, the time value of money is extremely important in the insurance industry because of inflation rates and the cost of replacement and the values of home and vehicles, like we talked about throughout the show. So if somebody has a $250,000 home and they're saving $2,500 a year, like you said, for that repairs and maintenance out of pocket, that's the small stuff I don't want to hang on to with the insurance company. Well, if I put $2,500 aside and I keep that in the bank 3-4 years from now, that $2,500 is not going to cut it nearly as quick as it should, because inflation has gone up. That $2,500 has a lot less value to it than it did when I first set it aside because of the 1% value of my home. So we need to keep that pot going, keep building to it, and be ready to utilize that with the mindset that this is part of going to a church and maintaining a building, owning a business and having things pop up. And the cost of running a home and living with a family in the United States of America is that these things are affecting us. And the insurance company, again, is not designed to be your savior. It is designed to be a cash pot to assist with recovery. And you have to take lead, take charge of your own events and your own future and your own situation. And is there anything I'm missing in those statements?
You nailed it. You've nailed it. Those who recover the best are those who take responsibility and realize that it's their job to get back in work and get back on track. and to start the recovery and to take responsibility, not just for themselves, but their employees as well, if they're in a business situation.
That's perfect. And so that's going to lead me into a little bit of a tangent moving towards some of our closing statements for this episode. And you've heard us talking a lot throughout the night about, again, preparation, to have workflows and systems and do your very best not to have all of your eggs in one basket, like going back to a brick and mortar only location where you have no ability to operate or communicate remotely. Do not rely on just allowing someone else to rebuild your future or save you. You must take charge of your own position. Make sure that you have the coverages that you need. Don't rely on somebody else to spoon feed you all the information and all the what if scenarios, but take charge and get out front in your leadership and say, what about this? Do I need that? What if the worst case scenario happens? And Jared, you and I have played the what if game several times when going over insurance coverages over all these years. And it's the ability for the individual, the business leader, whoever's in charge of that relationship or that influence, to go out there and substantiate that they have done their very best to protect themselves and those in their stead so that they can recover on their own accord, help their neighbors in recovery. That reminds me of a statement. There's a Sheriff Wright in North Carolina. I've just driven through North Carolina and seen a lot of the damage, even talked to some of the work crews at the gas station and seeing the organizations and the systems and the workflows and the communications that they're putting in place. And what's really happening is that the people that are able to help themselves can also help their neighbors. And they're going down into each other's houses. And I'm seeing people with pickup trucks and trailers and things like that. And I'm just going to tell you guys, they don't have all of their Department of the Department of Transportation stickers and flags on them, but they're driving down in those hollers and those valleys and they're pulling their people out. And because they're able to take care of themselves, because they're not waiting on FEMA or somebody else to save them, because they've prepared, because they've communicated, and because they've done everything that Jared has told you tonight, they're able to rise above as much as possible in a catastrophic situation, and they're able to serve and help and recover. And so in our closing thoughts tonight, I just want everyone to know that we're looking back in two tragedies that just occurred in the last couple of weeks. And I want everyone's thoughts and hearts and prayers to be with all those people. If you can find a way to donate or serve, go ahead and do it. And that leaves me on the end of the show with this same thought that we have every night. I want you to look out into the world and I want you to see the change and I want you to be the change. And we'll catch you on the next episode of Pivotal Change. Jared, thanks for coming, sir.
Thank you.
This has been a Now Media Networks feature presentation. All rights reserved.